Nancy had always dreamed of being a mother, but she had health issues that prevented that. However, when, by God's grace, she finally did, she was met with many obstacles. Eventually, her love for her child overcame all odds. Nancy and her husband, Jeff, got married straight out of college. Nancy loved her husband and couldn't wait for them to have children. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother, but she couldn't get pregnant. Nancy had grown up with several health complications, which made it hard for her to conceive. However, she and her husband still did not give up. Nancy was adamant about making her dream come true. While her doctor had always been clear that it would be near impossible for her to conceive, Nancy never gave up hope. Meanwhile, as Nancy and Jeff were trying for a child, Jeff was simultaneously facing problems at work. Nancy adored her husband dearly, but was not blind to his flaws. Jeff tended to be lazy, always opting for the easy way out. He had recently been let off from work for insubordination and seemingly had no intention of getting a job anytime soon. This became an even larger problem when Nancy finally got pregnant. She was over the moon, but worried Jeff would be unable to step up to the plate and provide for their family. Jeff assured her that all would be well and that he would do right by her and the baby. Unfortunately, when it came time for Nancy to go into labor, her health problems caused great complications. The doctors were eventually forced to put Nancy in a medically induced coma. Nancy had only seen her child for a minute before she fell into a drug-induced coma. Amid the unbearable afterbirth pains, Nancy's truest pain was seeing the dream she had longed for so long being stripped from her arms after a minute. Her body began convulsing as the doctors prepared her for the medication that would put her to sleep for a very long time. The last thing she saw was the doctor handing her newborn son over to Jeff, and with the last bit of strength in her, she faintly uttered the words B. Brandon H. His name is Brandon. She then lost consciousness. Given the severity of Nancy's birth complications and her medical condition, she had to stay in a coma for over 3 years. Jeff's financial situation had worsened at that time, and he was getting desperate. As he looked for solutions outside of getting a job, Jeff learned that several state-funded benefits and privileges came with being a single parent. He decided to make himself the sole legal guardian of their baby boy and milk it for all he could. So Jeff managed to get full custody of their son, and the court also deprived Nancy of parental rights because she was in a coma. Soon her husband took his son and returned to his hometown to live with his parents rent-free and pocketing whatever he could. A few years later, Nancy came out of her coma to find nobody by her side. When she learned how long she had been in a coma, she concluded that her family had moved on, and she was okay with that. She would have wanted them to enjoy their lives. However, she was determined to get better and see them. She yearned dearly to finally become the mother she had always hoped to be, and it was this very yearning that helped her through a challenging and lengthy recovery. Nancy had to learn how to walk and eat again. Her muscles had been out of use for so long that every slight movement brought seismic agony. Nevertheless, she pushed through the pain, telling herself it was all for her boy, Brandon. After recovery, Nancy tracked down Jeff and her son at his parents' house. She was elated to finally get the chance to hold her baby boy in her arms. She stepped up to the door, still limping, but with joy like never before, as she thought of what awaited her on the other side. As she heard footsteps approaching, Nancy hit the doorbell and drew out the freshly picked flowers she had for them. Jeff opened the door, shocked to see an elated Nancy at the door with flowers. "What are you doing here?" Jeff asked in frustrated confusion. "Jeff, what do you mean? I thought you'd be happy to see me," Nancy said, utterly bewildered. "You shouldn't be here," Jeff snapped. "Love, you're being ridiculous. Let me in," Nancy said with a chuckle, approaching Jeff with arms open, hoping for a hug. "I'm serious, Nancy. You're not welcome here anymore," Jeff said, gently shoving Nancy away. "This isn't funny, Jeff. Where's Brandon?" Nancy insisted, trying to shove past Jeff with no success. "Listen, Nancy, I have full custody of Jeff now. You've been gone for too long." Jeff snapped before falling into a soft, hesitantly calm tone. "Don't come back here again," he concluded before shutting the door in Nancy's face. Nancy went back home, completely confounded at what had just taken place. She tried to reach Jeff on the phone, but he wouldn't answer a single call. For Nancy, the birth of her child and the love she shared with Jeff was something she had carried for a few years. But for them, so much time had passed, and Jeff's response left her that much more clueless. After a few days of wallowing, trying to figure things out, and trying to piece herself together, she put her feelings aside and decided she would return her son no matter what. In an ugly, drama-infused saga, Nancy would go to Jeff's house every day screaming to see her son, and every time, Jeff would either slam the door in her face, threaten to call the police on her, or simply ignore her. One day, Nancy came to the house planning on applying the same pressure as she had been before. She was determined to get her child back. She knocked furiously at the door, ready for yet another back and forth with the former love of her life. The door opened, and Nancy was ready to cause a scene, but the view before her stopped her dead in her tracks, her emotions overflowing. "Brandon," Nancy said as she looked at her now 9-year-old son with welling eyes, her words dragging as they did the first time she laid eyes on him. "Are you my mother?" Brandon asked. Nancy just stood there in complete awe. By the time she had gathered a word in response, Jeff had stormed in, shutting the door in her face yet again. Nancy was completely distraught. However, seeing the child she had hoped for all of her life but only held for a single minute sparked something in Nancy. She was now more determined than ever. She was ready to take Jeff to court. Sometime later, Nancy found herself in court in one of the most trying moments of her life. She watched with a broken heart as the court-martial escorted her weary son to the stand. As she watched him, she thought of how they had only spoken 11 words to each other in his whole 9 years of existence. The pain of being so close to one's dream, desire, and love, yet so far, strung on the chords of her heart deeply. The court proceedings until that moment were all in favor of Jeff. If it were up to Nancy, she would have stopped the whole thing then and there. She wanted to be with her son, but more than that, she wanted him to be well, good, and happy. And the last thing she wanted was him in front of people he didn't know, expressing things he surely couldn't fully understand. I remember the countless nights praying to God and asking him to bring her back to me. As Brandon approached the stand, the judge hit his gavel, and the court fell silent. Brandon took a deep breath and shared a glare with his heartbroken mother. As she looked into his eyes, she remembered the first time she'd laid eyes on her promise, her little boy Brandon. A tear ran down Nancy's face, and just like magic, the very moment it hit the bench, Brandon looked up with unprecedented confidence. Not an arrogant confidence, but one of truth, his truth. Before the lawyer could even usher him into his testimony, Brandon began to speak. I don't know any of you, and I honestly think you're trying to help, but I know my parents, the two people who have brought us all here." Brandon took a beat, not only thinking about his next words, but reflecting on his life for a brief moment. "My father and grandparents raised me. I love my father, but I don't remember spending much time with him. What I do distinctly remember is longing to be with my mother. I remember going to school and seeing my friends being kissed affectionately by their mothers and longing to understand that." Brandon continued, welling up. "I remember the countless nights praying to God and asking him to bring her back to me. Even if it was just to have ice cream or for her to tuck me in for one night. These are the things I remember every day." Brandon continued. The court was now in an emotional engagement with the little boy's words. Brandon gave a stark, tender look at his mother, who looked up at him, trying her best not to break into sheer anguish. Brandon then pointed directly at her, in tears. "And now she's right here, as beautiful as ever. I still don't know her, but I'd like to. All I ask is that you guys give me that chance. We've both already lost too much time together," Brandon concluded. The young boy's touching words convinced the jury, and in the end, Nancy proved her rights in court. Brandon lived with Nancy and was happy that he finally had a mother. Jeff disappeared from their lives. It turned out that he raised the child only for the sake of benefits and privileges.